Look at this. The Cold War, one of the most trepidatious times in history that gets forgotten about a lot of times in history books, because when you finish World War II in your American history and your world history classes, you pretty much just coast to the end of the semester. The Cold War was one of the most fascinating times in our history and possibly one of the most transformative times for the United States and the rest of the world. This game is the Cold War in a box. Twilight Struggle. Now you recognize it because it was on the Board Game Geek Top 100 list, #1 slot forever and ever. But let's find out why, and does it still deserve a shot at the table?
When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and covered, ducked and covered.
The Cold War itself, now that's a weird topic. It's a 2-player game only, so you think, why was this up so high? It's a GMT game. Another reason for you to go, I'm totally scratching my head right now. What is going on? Why is this game so highly hyped and rated? You're talking about a time and a culture when things were dangerous, things were scary, people were living in fear constantly. You think about the Cuban Missile Crisis when the world was on the brink of thermonuclear war. Megaton bombs bigger than the atom bomb from World War II by 50 times, and that's an exponential number. So we're talking about huge amounts. So I wanted to take a look at this game and kind of just give it a re-review and understand why it was so popular, why it's still popular, and why with the reinvention of it through this app, it's still one of the greatest games of all time. So let's take a look right now. Let's take a look at some things that I want to ding it for first. First is the rule book. Now, like most people who are in this hobby, I'm a bit of a nerd, right? And so I like to enjoy reading rule books. I actually sit down and read rule books for fun sometimes because I like to learn games through that method. So, you take any Fantasy Flight rule book and wow, you get a rule book and a rules reference guide. How neat, right? Check that out. GMT does something a little bit different. They're in the war game genre. Now, what I mean by that is, imagine your friend comes to you and he says, hey, you got to check out this movie. It's fantastic. It's this high school love story. This guy meets this girl over the summer and they lose touch and they come back to school and it turns out she's going to his school now and it's incredible and they find their way back to each other. And you start watching it with your friend and you're like, wow, this is a cool movie. And then you look over at him and you say, why is everyone breaking into song and dancing choreographed? Why are they doing this? Why is every 5 minutes a new dance song number? Because there's a certain genre called musicals. And if you've never heard of the genre of musical before, that would look so bizarre and so strange to you. If you've never heard of the genre of war game before, especially GMT's war games, this rule book is going to be about like watching Grease if you're expecting the Fast and the Furious. It's not the same genre of thing. So I wanted to give you a heads up in that. So we'll take a look inside of the rulebook and see, kind of the things about it. You'll notice here, there's all different types of things. It has things laid out, listed by, cards, and then here's all the points of cards. Here's this and this and this. Instead of saying, well, here's how you play the game, here's how you win the game. It's very clinical, almost, how it's laid out. The one thing that I do love about the rulebook is in the end of it, though, there is a complete history for every single piece of card in this game. So the game plays kind of like this right here.
Okay, so here's a rough estimate of what the board looks like somewhat set up. Now, this is not the actual starting game setup, but these are some just some representatives how the game looks. Because you look at this and you think, how in the world does this game have all this theme and this tightness that you're talking about packed into it? I mean, you're talking about just a whole bunch of cards, a couple dice that are used, and these tokens, these war game tokens that you could probably use tweezers for if you were old enough to want to use tweezers for and all that kind of stuff. But let's take a look at the board first and see. This is the map, the mounted board that GMT talks about, which any other company would just call that a board, but apparently sometimes they release paper mats. And anyway, so US starts here. This is the US. This is the USSR over here. Action round track. So anytime you take an action, you'll flip it to the next person's. That way everyone knows they've taken both actions. Each round consists of a certain number of actions, 7 until you get to the mid-war, and then it's 8. Up here's the turn track. The game goes all the way for 10 rounds. It goes all the way into these. You add the cards when it says the mid-war, late-war cards there. It's got all the presidents up there. Great imagery of the board. Space race track is here. The further up on the space race track you get, the better benefits you get. Down here's the victory points track. So if the Soviets are winning, the victory points go higher here. The USA is winning, it'll go down there. And it's a tug of war match in that sort of sense. Down here's the DEFCON status. This is when the world is going to blow up. Basically, you can win and lose this game in a few different ways. I'll just put this here because I don't remember where the token is exactly. But there's three main ways to win this game. Excuse me, here it is. Three main ways to win this game, three main ways to lose this game. Two of which are very thematic, one of which is totally 100% mechanic. There is no reason for this to be a way to win this game except for mechanical. And here's the two ways you can win. You can win by points, first of all. If you reach 20 points here or 20 points there, you are the winner. You can also win by making the other person create nuclear war. Your goal is to not be the one that starts nuclear war. Everyone technically is a loser in the game of life at nuclear war, but in the game, as far as Twilight Struggle is concerned, if you are the one that causes nuclear war to break out, you lose, no matter what side you're on. The other way to lose is by having what's called a scoring card in your hand. So these scoring cards, you have them in the game. When you play them, you will score them based on this says. So presence, dominance, control, and +1 for battleground. This is Africa. So each area is cordoned off by different colors. So you have Europe, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Middle East, South America, Central America, and then Asia is divided into a couple different ways out there, Southeast and regular. That only matters when the card comes in certain times. There's a Southeast Asia scoring card as well as just a regular Asia scoring card. The way you score, so for instance, this is control of this area because it's flipped to this side. This number, let's put it on 3. So Benelux here. This number's a 3. You have 3 operations points there. It means you have enough influence points to control this. Now, if you didn't have enough, let's say it was here in Austria, you'd flip it to this side. So there's a color coordinated way to know if you are controlling it or if you just have a presence there. This means, though, a presence in the area that you're scoring. So Europe, right now, I have a presence because I control one of these countries. The U.S., or one of these places, the Soviets have a presence as well because they control this. If you control the area of Europe, you also win. That's the other way to win the game, is to play the scoring card and control Europe. So technically there's 4 ways to win, 3 of which are thematic, one of which is very mechanical. Now, the other thing about this is you have presence. You get 3 points just for having presence here. You have domination, which means you control more of the area than the other side does. And then control also means you control all the battleground countries. Now you notice these purple ones here? These are battleground countries. When you do a coup or a realignment roll in those places, you can only do those based on what the DEFCON status is. So if there's a peace right now, there's no restrictions. If you have a 4 DEFCON status, you can't do coup or realignment rolls in Europe. 3 is Asia and Europe. 2 is Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. And of course, 1, everyone loses nuclear war. So you'll be busy placing your tokens out there, trying to get influence points in all these different areas on the country. And here's how that works. These cards, I love games that are card driven, but especially games where the cards do multiple things. So for instance, you get a set of 8 cards in your hand. Let's break down kind of some things about these cards. So first of all, this one has a white star up here, which means it's the U.S.-driven card. Basically, it really helps their faction is what that means. You can play this card multiple ways. There's several different ways to do it. First, you can play it purely for the operations points up here, which would be 1. So that means you could put, 1 influence out on the board somewhere. So if you have a 2, you could turn it into a 3. Let's pretend that's a 3. You could turn it into a 3. You could do a realignment roll, which is where you roll the dice and try to get the, let's say right here where we're both kind of competing in France. So this would lose control here. So if we're both trying to compete for that, you could you could try to realign their influence there to lower their number to where maybe you can get above there in France. You can do a coup, which could potentially lower their number and add numbers of your operations points there, but it all has to do with this operations number here and how to do that. You'll roll some dice, and if you come out higher, you win that coup or that operations, the realignment roll. And so that's what that's all about. Other way to play it is for the actual card itself, the headline of the card itself. So this is the CIA created. It says USSR reveals hand this turn. The U.S. may conduct operations if they played a 1-op card. So you get to look at their hand the entire turn, and this is the turn track up here. So it's all 8 action rounds. You get to look at their hand the whole time, and then you can spend a one-up card, so that's cool. Now let's look at this one. This one, the UN intervention, it goes for either one. So that means it doesn't really benefit anybody worse than the other one. Here's a Soviet card here. So the Arab-Israeli War. So this is the Pan-Arab Coalition. You read the whole text, have a cool picture up here, you do what it says, or you can play for operations points. Now here's the interesting thing. So let's say the US player gets this card in their hand and they decide, okay, I want to play it for the 2 operations points. Well, if you play the other team's card, this red card for the Soviets, you have to do this part of the text as well. If it's yours, you don't have to. Like duck and cover here, you wouldn't have to if you're the US player. Granted, you would, if you can only do it for one or the other. But if you're playing the opponent's card, you get the operations points, they get to do whatever the card says. So you have that push and pull of when do I play this card, do I play it now? There's one other thing, that rule I said about holding a scoring card. If you have a scoring card in your hand and it's your last card, your hold card for the turn, if you're allowed to keep one card, you lose. So you have to end up playing cards that you don't want to play. For instance, this might be your only card that you can play before you lose the game and have to play this one. But this clearly is a good card for you because it's 4 operations points, but it definitely benefits the other side. One thing I forgot to mention is the space race track. You can also just play a card and use it to roll on the space race track. You have to roll in a certain range and you get to move up the space race track. Well, the good part about it is you don't have to do anything the card says if you want to do that. So it's a good way to get rid of a bad card in your hand is to use it on the space race, and that's limit once per turn. And so it's a real push and pull of when you do things, how you do things. And here's the deal. These are just the early war cards. As the Cold War drags on into this 40-year conflict, you get mid-war cards and late-war cards all adding to the complexity of the game. Some cards give you victory points when you score. You'll score and do this tug-of-war thing. Then at the last round, at the end of round 10, whoever's ahead wins. It is a fantastic experience, though, because it looks so blank. It looks just kind of bland. There's chits on a board with little squares, right? That's all it seems like. But these cards add so much depth to the game, and they're beautiful. And yeah, they're simple, but look at this. There's an actual picture on every single one of the cards. And the coolest part about this is every single one of them is different. There's no 2 alike, and they're so just unique about what they all do. And you have to decide, how you're going to use them. And they're all really thematic. And the coolest part about it is there's an index over here in the back of the instruction book, and we'll get to a segment on that. It tells what every single one of these cards means historically, which is so cool, because if you're a history buff like me, and I love this game for that, that is fantastic to have. Just a history of each single card and what it means and all that sort of stuff. So that's how the game kind of plays. Let's look at a few other thoughts about this game and why it stayed so high on Board Game Geek's list for so long.
So let's talk about some things that make this game absolutely incredible. I mean, first of all, it's a 2-player game where you play the entire Cold War. Now, there are other games by GMT that are card-driven that I thought were just as simple. This one does something incredible. It takes this card-driven GMT war game style that you walk into the game stores in your local town and you see the older guys playing with tweezers, moving these little chits and tokens around, and you think, oh dear Lord, they've been playing that for 6 hours and they're sweating. How are they having any fun? And they are. I have Paths of Glory, for instance. I've never played Paths of Glory. I don't know that I will because the rules are so much more complex than this one. This is simple. You take a card, you do something with it. That's it. You can do a few different things. Obviously, there's a little bit more complexity to it than that, but it's very easy to get this game and to understand it, especially if someone's teaching it to you. It's not a hard one to teach you. There are a few nuanced rules, obviously, but you look at the map, you have the entire world before you. And just like in the Cold War, you have spheres of influence. You're trying to get people to side with you. And just like in the Cold War in real life, you have things like China, who is kind of a wild card and jumps between sides, between Chiang Kai-shek and Mao, all these different things happening throughout the Cold War history. It really does show what the Cold War was like. There's this tension, this fear, this feeling of, oh my goodness, are we about to go to nuclear war? There's this thought of, am I about to start World War III by sending in the nuclear weapons to Russia? Because they're immediately going to retaliate, and it's called mutually assured destruction. I was listening to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History about this, about the atomic bomb and about nuclear weapons, and it just got me thinking how much I love this game. And there's that fear the whole time of, am I going to start World War III? Am I going to be the one? Now, of course, you just lose a game. You don't cause, nuclear meltdown and millions of lives killed, but there's a fear and a feeling of, what am I going to do this turn? What can I do to save face, right? Because you want to look good. You don't want your team to look horrible. You want to look good. You want to win the political side as well as the military side. So you want to win this battle. You want to fight this thing. You can duck and cover, all these different cards. You can be in a fallout shelter where people are living in constant fear of their lives being ended, but yet You control it all, and you get to make the decisions that do that on a turn-by-turn basis. And it plays quick. You play in action, they play in action. You play in action, they play in action. Just that alone makes this one of the best games of all time. The fact that it is a war game, it is a two-player war game, but it's in a Cold War, which is so fascinating, yet almost not talked about. It's like we don't talk about the Cold War, yet this plays every piece of the Cold War from the beginning to the middle to the late war until it's over. And then there was the sequel of 1989, Dawn of Freedom, which if you have a copy of that, send it to me, please, for free. No, I'm kidding. I'll buy it from you, but I want to play it. If it's anything like this, and I know it's supposedly not as good as this one, but oh my goodness, I cannot recommend Twilight Struggle enough. And here's the beautiful thing. There's an app for it now, so you can play this. And say you don't have somebody to play this with. You're in the bunker, right? The bombs, the sirens are going off. And I don't mean to be flippant. This was a serious time in history. But you can now play this against the computer in the app. And the app looks a little something like this. And the coolest part about the app is it thinks. The computer actually thinks. You watch this little bar go, and the computer's thinking what move it's going to do. I love that because you're still just as tense as if you're sitting across from someone. Now, this obviously loses something because you lose that person-to-person aspect. But this is one of the best apps out there because it is a full game, full war game, strategic, tactical thinking in an app. Should you get the app? Of course. Should you get Twilight Struggle? Absolutely. You need to at least play this game. If you don't own it, you should play it without a doubt, 100%. So that's the latest Retros look at Twilight Struggle. #1 game on Board Game Geek for a long time. One of my favorite games of all time, about one of my favorite subjects of all time. It's history in a box. You cannot go wrong. If you want to learn something, just read the instruction booklet. It's history. It's incredible. Check it out. So make sure to follow us on Twitter at The Latest Retro. I'm Brian Drake. We'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.